Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today is part 2 of our high control horror stories series. Today I'm going to read a few more of the stories that were sent to me under this request on Reddit. As always, if you have your own story, please feel free to email it to me. My email is down below, or leave it in the comment section and I might read it in a future video. Okay, this one says, I mostly remember being aware of Dobson as the guy who decided how to limit our media consumption, which didn't work, by the way. One week my parents would declare something to be evil because they read about it in some pamphlet from Focus on the Family. The next, we'd be at the video store renting the evil movie. I really think that already this part is speaking to the inconsistencies that people will sometimes grow up with in Christian households. It's kind of like shifting quicksand. Like one moment things are fine, the next they've been added to the rules of the church, or in this case, the rules of the evangelical talk show. Then I learned about the spanking advice. Then I had friends and partners who showed me scars from parents who got the same advice. Mine aren't visible anymore, but one that stands out was on a girlfriend's right butt cheek. Her mom broke an acrylic nail off and gouged her pretty bad. Wow. That is horrifying. I cannot imagine the force that you have to be using to break an acrylic nail off on your child and leave a scar. It's kind of weird and maybe specific to my life. It seems to be okay to show your butt platonically to someone if you grew up in a Focus on the Family household. Yeah, I'm getting Cheetos in my hair. Caleb's just gonna join us for the time being. Someone else said underneath that post, this was kind of my experience too. My parents were inconsistent in applying these teachings, but also they were very sensitive, still are, to what their church friends think of them and their kids. And this is where you get this like underlying competitive atmosphere where everyone's trying to out-Christian each other. If my parents said a TV show or movie was off limits, it was. But sometimes another TV show in the same vein was okay. We were spanked also, but not in a way that did physical damage. Just emotional, I guess. My sisters got it worse than me because I was a compliant firstborn. Now, in middle age, I still sometimes don't know who I am or what I like or how to make a decision, but I'm trying to figure it out. I love that this person brought up that loss of identity that can happen in these communities because you end up so focused on following an external structure with all of its rules and like social expectations and everything. And especially when you combine that with using corporal punishment, there can be so much fear that gets like trapped in the body that depending on your temperament, it can be really difficult to figure out what you actually want. This person, same idea. It says, my parents were also super inconsistent. They got more committed as we got older, but a lot of my memories pre-age 12 are of being confused why a radio station that was okay yesterday was not okay today, or why a book I'd checked out at the library hundreds of times was now not allowed. Same theme here, just inconsistency, and it's because people in these communities are just taking it upon themselves to determine what is right and wrong kind of for their congregations. This one says, yes, the slow creep on books, music, TV, everything. The inconsistency really messed with me. That's what I'm saying. Especially during those single digit years, kids really need consistency. And I think that a lot of consistency happens naturally when you follow your own parenting instincts. But instead, when you externalize those decisions to like this third party, well, there's room for this constant hypocrisy and up and down that we see. One day, my dad was making a scene about the top I was wearing, saying he would not allow me outside with it on. I pointed out that I was wearing the same top in the framed photo that he loved of me sitting 1 foot away from him. Instead of reconsidering, he lost his mind. I moved out soon after. That is so heartbreaking. It sounds like this person does not have as close of a relationship with their father as they could have. And it's sounding like it's kind of tied to that theme of like sexualizing girls at a young age to try to implement modesty and having this weird dynamic between fathers and their daughters where fathers are responsible for like controlling their daughter's sexuality. And I hate to say that I'm not surprised that this person moved out soon afterwards. Because like this writer said, it's a slow creep and sometimes there just becomes more and more rules, more and more control in the community and then in the household. Oh my gosh, this one says, I distinctly remember my brother and I being sent into the backyard to find a switch for our grandmother to spank us with. We tested the switches on each other to see which would hurt the least. Despite the archaic nature of this anecdote, this was in the late 2000s. This story to me kind of brings up that theme of how almost like ritualistic this form of discipline is. And I think that that helps to explain the problem that I have with this kind of corporal punishment, because something's really off to me about it. To have it be so premeditated that you're sending children out to find an object that you are going to hit them with. You know, I was talking about this topic with someone in my life recently, and we are talking about the difference between smacking a hand away from a hot stove and that kind of version of corporal punishment from this ritualistic, planned out, in my opinion, abusive form of physical punishment. It's like Michael Pearl says in his book, which I talk about in this episode of my podcast, where caregivers are specifically taught to add the psychological torture element. So, you know, to me, and knowing what I know about child development, that is super disturbing. Like I always say, I really do believe that most people are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have. And I know that this kind of thing was so much more common a few generations ago. Thank goodness we are becoming aware of the negative effects of it. This next short and sweet one-liner really kind of captures that as well. Someone said, I tried to raise my kids that way, and we are still trying to heal from it. I really wanted to include this one, even though it was so short, because I think it takes so much bravery and courage to admit that you did something that maybe you wish you hadn't with your children. Even as we talk about parents making bad decisions, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're all human and we're all bound to do things that. So I really loved that this person was willing to share that they had kind of been on the other end of this corporal punishment scenario. That's what this person's referring to here. And so you can tell by the fact that this person was able to admit that and is on the path of healing that they're already doing the work to just understand themselves and their relationships better. So that's really beautiful to see. All right, this next one says, wow, I haven't heard James Dobson or Focus on the Family since I was young, but man, did it trigger me. In the post where I was requesting these stories, I was also talking about the Focus on the Family series that I'm doing on my podcast. His teachings were a very integral part of my family's church and household teachings. Small town Minnesota. That's another whole thing that we haven't even gotten into. The way that different religious sectors thrive in different parts of the United States. That's another whole fascinating thing that we could get into further at some point. It says, there's probably a few stories I could remember, but the one that is ingrained in my head was when I was probably 12. My dad and I went on a road trip and we listened to the James Dobson tape that was all about puberty and, quote, becoming a man. My dad just kind of played the tape and would ask me if I had any questions. There's actually another common theme, this kind of outsourcing of especially things like sexual education. Kids in these communities being given incomplete or inaccurate sexual education. All of it was very confusing for me and felt completely wrong because at that point in my life, I knew that I was gay. Oh my goodness, that so rarely goes well in these communities. My heart really goes out for kids that are feeling that way and feeling the anxiety of the messaging they're receiving in these churches. My heart really goes out for kids that are feeling that way and are feeling so much anxiety because of the messaging that they're getting in these communities. Yeah, this writer goes on to say, but I never would have told that to anybody because it was considered living in sin, and I didn't want to deal with that as a minor in the church. There's a lot more details I could go into, but I don't want to put them here. OP, if you'd like to hear more or ask any questions, feel free to DM me. No, I did DM this person, but I didn't hear anything back, so if I do in the future, I'll give an update. I'll just remind you guys of the story because, as you know, I've been protecting everybody's identity just to be on the safe side. All right, this is the last one I'm going to read for today. This one says, everything came back to focus for me. I don't remember a lot of the corporal punishment stuff. Although spanking was a thing, it was only in the very early years. My parents, mostly mom, were especially tied into the books on adolescence. I remember reading them for myself and using them as a guide for those formative years. I completely bought into that purity culture thought process. Purity culture is referring to the teachings about staying pure, quote unquote, as in not having sex before you're married. And there are a lot of analogies that get used, like things like once you've had sex, you're like chewed gum. And it did a lot of damage to a lot of people throughout their adolescence. My parents divorced when I was a teen, and it was incredibly disruptive. I leaned into the evangelical teachings even more and became more devoted to the church. Even so, I was deeply vilified just for existing as a teen girl with normal emotions. At one point, I was 13 and an 18-year-old boy in my youth group liked me. I didn't do anything remotely promiscuous. I was too naive at that point. I was told by adults that I had a spirit of Jezebel. Oh my goodness, the Jezebel. This is based on a biblical story about a woman named Jezebel who was kind of promiscuous, and it's like the Christian way of calling someone an SLUT. So that's so crazy that they're saying this to a 13-year-old. It was confusing to grow up in that environment where boys were held to a different standard. I didn't notice at the time and just accepted it as the way things were. Yeah, because when you're growing up in these communities, you don't have anything to compare it to. And it's a big reason why they keep them closed off. They don't want members to be corrupted by the world, by which they mean questioning any of the teachings of the church. Later on as an adult, I turned to Dobson's book, Love Must Be Tough, to deal with my abusive marriage. It kept me trapped for 6 years until the bastard finally cheated on me and I got my golden ticket out of there. Dobson teaches in that book and in many other places within Focus on the Family that the only reason to leave a marriage is marital infidelity. That is absolutely true, and it's another thing I talked about in that last episode on Focus on the Family. This is actually that write-in I was referring to in there that prompted me to look into what his advice was for women in abusive situations, and it's shocking. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here, especially if you've made it all the way to the end. If you have your own story, I would love to hear it. I'd love to read it on this channel. Once again, you can send it to me in my email, which will be in the description box. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time.